Takes a little minute. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DSA and Lions on the Prowl presents a question and answer session with Mike Rothstein from ESPN. And we would like to welcome Mike in right now. Hello, Mike. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I really appreciate you doing this for us. And we want to get right to questions. Mike has about 30 minutes with us tonight. So we want to make sure that we get into questions right away. And the first person I'm going to ask, we have a panel tonight. We got Nomus, we got JMO, we got Tim, and we've got Micro Mike. So I'm going to let them ask questions. I'm going to start with Micro Mike.
Yes, sir. I have a question here with that first pick in this draft. My belief is the Lions are going to trade down possibly to 5 or 6. With the recent moves when it comes to the safety and linebacker position, do you feel we will move back and possibly take Okudah?
I mean, listen, Jeffrey Okudah to me is maybe the pick at 3 or at 5 or at 6. He makes a lot of sense. He's a really fluid corner. He's a man press corner that fits really well with what Matt Patricia likes to do defensively. As far as trading down, there's always the old adage of you need a partner to do that. But I think right now there should be 1 or 2 partners for the Lions. I think would be palatable. It's just a matter if they choose to make those offers and if the offer is good enough. To me, it makes sense for the Lions to drop down from 3 if they can drop down to 5 or 6, because at that point you're still getting one of the Jeffrey Okudah, Isaiah Simmons, Derek Brown, Javon Kinlaw group, right? Like that's that group of 4 elite defensive players. So to me, if you can drop down and still get one of those 4 guys and also get more picks to help bolster the rest of your roster, that's really smart. And I think something that Bob Quinn would want to do. But if the offers don't come, if I'm the Lions, I'm cool with sitting there at 3 and taking, taking Okudah or maybe taking Isaiah Simmons. I don't see them taking Tua. I just really can't see it happening. But don't forget, there is also that chance. I don't think it's a great chance, but I think there is a chance that Tua ends up going number 2. And then if Chase Young's sitting there, I've said this every place I've talked, including on my own podcast, the Michael Rothstein show, that the Lions should sprint. Well, now it would probably be virtually sprint, but like virtually sprint to the podium to hand in a card to take Chase Young, because that would be the best possible pick. That guy, I think Okudah is really good. I think Isaiah Simmons is going to be really, really good. And both defensive tackles, I think, have the potential to be, Pro Bowl level type players. I think it's a really good elite draft. But Chase Young to me is a generational type player. So if you can take him, I think you do.
That sounds really, really good. We're going to go right now to Tim. And what is your question?
Okay. How much do you think losing Darius Slay is really going to hurt the Lions this season, or will it help them because of the fallout he had with Matt Patricia?
Yeah, so here's the thing. It never affected Darius Slay's on-field play. It never did. I mean, he was a Pro Bowler back-to-back years when he was playing under Matt Patricia. I talked to Darius Slay on Thursday, which I guess it was a week ago Thursday now, or Friday. Man, it's just been a long time. Every day is a blur at this point. But I talked to Darius Slay after he was traded, is the point. And, we talked about that. And I think both, if you look at how he played, I don't think that there was this drastic dip in play. Yeah, I don't think he played as well in 2019 as he did in 2018, but I think that was a larger defensive issue, because you're asking him to cover man-to-man a lot of the time, cover top receivers. You're not getting any defensive pressure to the quarterback. And I don't care what cornerback you are. I don't care if you're Jalen Ramsey. I don't care if you're Darius Slay. I don't care if you're the 3rd cornerback on a roster. I don't care if you're a Pro Bowler. Whoever you are, with very, very rare exceptions. Maybe you're looking at Champ Bailey or Deion Sanders, right? And we're talking the last 30 years. Very, very rarely can you find a corner that can cover for 4 or 5 seconds, cover a receiver for 4 or 5 seconds in man. It's just not feasible, because the receiver knows where you're going. The corner may know where you're going, but not totally know where you're going. And at some point, chasing gets really hard. So I don't think I'm curious to see how Darius plays in Philadelphia early on, because I think you'll still see him play at a Pro Bowl level. And do I think that'll hurt the defense? Yeah, getting rid of good players hurts the defense, and getting rid of your best corner hurts the defense. And Desmond Trufant is a fine player. He's a fine player. He's at one point was a very, very good player. I don't think he's quite at the level of Darius Slay. And that should be a concern for the Lions. I wrote this. It's going to run this week, I think, and I've said it before that I think the Lions went into free agency with defensive tackle and cornerback being their two biggest defensive needs. And I think they're leaving free agency with defensive tackle and cornerback still potentially being their two biggest needs as far as elite end talent. I think they added really good talent at linebacker. I think Jamie Collins, as long as Jamie Collins wants to play and comes in shape, I think will be an upgrade over Devon Kennard, and you can move him all over the place in the defense. I think Jaron Harmon will help and will allow them to move Tracy Walker around a little bit more, but you still need an elite cornerback, and you just traded one. And to me, if you're running Matt Patricia's defense, you need a really good player up the middle, and Danny Shelton is a question mark. I think he could end up being better than Snacks Harrison, because Snacks Harrison was, I think, more at the was starting to trend downward in age and maybe in ability, where Danny Shelton, I think, has a chance to maybe still get a little bit better. So that'll be something to watch. That's a long answer for saying I don't know if the defense got better. I think they changed around a lot of pieces.
Yeah,
okay,
I
thank
agree
you
with you on that, to be honest. All right, JMO, what's your question?
Okay, my question is this is more of the fans, because a lot of the fans they think that we lack speed at wide receiver to the point that maybe it's preventing us from being successful and winning games. So, looking at our receivers, we don't have the fastest receivers in the world, but we got a pretty good receiving core. But my question is, besides the fact of the speed, what do you think TJ Hawkinson role should be in this offense? Should he be the first option, the second option, the third option, the fourth option?
Well, I mean, he's a tight end, first of all, so it's a different type of skill set and a different type of thing that you're looking from him, right? Like, to hit the receiver point first, yeah, they're not the fastest receiving core out there, but listen, it's not always just about speed when it comes to being a receiver. If it was, Al Davis's Raiders from like the late 80s and early 90s would have never lost the game, because all they did was like have a ton of speed, right? I mean, that was what they drafted. They drafted fast dudes, and the Raiders didn't win a Super Bowl. They weren't particularly great then, right? So I look at, Marvin Jones, and I look at Kenny Golladay, and they're two of the best contested ball receivers in the league. Kenny Golladay is going to be a star if he's not there already. And so I don't worry about as much about speed. And you can get speed in the draft, by the way. And I still think they're going to draft a receiver in maybe one of the deepest receiving drafts in recent memory. So just to hit on receiver there a little bit, I think they'll draft a receiver, or maybe they draft a speed guy, and you still have Marvin Hall, who's plenty fast. So you have some speed options there. As far as TJ Hawkinson, I don't think he's ever going to be option one, as long as you have Kenny Golladay, because Kenny Golladay should be option one, right? And then after that, I think you're probably looking at a combination of Marvin Jones and TJ Hawkinson being options 2 and 3 in an ideal offense, or passing offense for the Lions, because they both will give you different things, and they will make it really hard for opposing defenses to cover. If TJ Hawkinson lives up to what a lot of people think he still can be, and I'm in the camp that he still can be very, very good. Tight end is a really hard position to transition to. In the NFL, he had injuries last year, and his numbers were still on par with Tony Gonzalez. And people are like, oh, he wasn't, I've seen people actually call him a bust. And I'm like, hold on. First of all, it's been a year. Like, slow your roll on him being a bust, right? Second of all, when it comes to TJ Hawkinson, tight ends have a different growth rate than, say, a running back or a receiver or a defensive end. It's, to me, very similar to like a corner in some ways. It takes time. Remember Darius Slay, going back to him, he got benched as a rookie. So it takes time for tight ends to develop. I think TJ Hawkinson will develop. Obviously, his injury at the end of last season is concerning. Would want to see him back healthy. To me, he's somebody who I don't know if he would have practiced at all if in the spring here, right? But if there were spring workouts, which we don't know whether there will be, you kind of have to think. Chase Daniel at least said he doesn't think they're going to be. That he could be hampered by that, but I also don't know how much work he would have gotten in the spring because I haven't really heard much about his recovery to this point. So all of that to say, I think he's option 2 or 3 in this offense next year, and that's where he should be, frankly, because you have a true number 1 receiver in Kenny Golladay, and that should be your number 1 option.
Okay, so Nomis, what is your question? We didn't want to save you for last here, but save the best for last. Okay.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Michael. I just want to know one thing. It's been no secret with the Lions' offensive issues. We have several receivers, running backs, and now you have a new tight end set that should improve. But the problem has always been stated, is that offensive line. It's been some question marks over the last decades or more about the offensive line, I should say, with Taylor Decker now coming into the year. I haven't heard too many things that's going on with him. We know Frank Ragnow should be getting better and better every year with constant center position. Now you had 2 questions at the guard position. You just signed Big V as your splash off-season acquisition for the offensive tackle who does fit Bob Quinn's type of style as a versatile guy. My question is where do they go from here and finding new guards, and where will they possibly go for offensive tackle? Because it's still not, to me, sold on what they're going to do with Taylor Decker. And to me, we still do have a lot of issues at the guard position.
Yeah, so I mean, at tackle, I think for 2020, you're kind of locked into what you got because you've got Decker at left tackle, you've got V at right tackle. I'm not gonna try V at right tackle, and you've got Tyrell Crosby more than likely as your swing tackle, or maybe Tyrell Crosby gets pushed by a draft pick. To me, Frank Ragnow is your center. To me, the question is guard, as you said, and personally, I still think Joe Dahl is a capable starter. Listen, you can't pay big money to everybody. You need to get guys like Joe Dahl who can be good for you, right? Like every team that's any good has guys like Joe Dahl step up. So to me, Joe Dahl is probably one of your starting guards, and that's fine. I think he's an average NFL player, and that's not a bad thing, right? Like the question is at the other guard, and I still maintain that the starting guard, probably right guard, but it could be left because Joe Dahl can play both. The starting right guard for the Lions is not on the roster yet. Which means either it could be a veteran signing late, because I think there are some veterans that their price will come down as things go here. And if it's not that, then I think it could be a rookie. Listen, they have a lot of options, right? I think they have a lot of nice depth options actually at guard, between Russell Bodine, who's really more of a center but can play guard, Joshua Garnett. A lot of people forgot they signed him. He was a first-round pick at some point. Lost his job actually when they traded Laken Tomlinson to San Francisco. And then there's Bo Benchwall, who they really like as an undrafted free agent. And they have Ode Abuche, who came in okay and played, I think, all right at the end of last season. And Kenny Wiggins is still a free agent. They could maybe bring him back too. So I think that right now they're sitting with a lot of depth options. I would not be surprised to see them take a guard in the draft and have that guard just thrown in there and compete with Joe Dahl and all those people that I just mentioned, and kind of made the best 2 guards win. And if it's a draft pick, that draft pick's probably on the roster. And if they don't win that, the draft pick doesn't win that starting role, that draft pick is probably your number 3 guard or your backup interior lineman across all 3 spots. If that not known player ends up having some center capability as well. So I think that there's a lot still to be determined. At least on the offense, the biggest question to me is still at guard. And I think it's by far the biggest need for the Lions on offense. And to me, it's the only offensive need in probably the top 5 of overall team needs is at guard.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into the questions from the chat. And the first one is from Lions Lee. He says, Michael, do you think there's a chance that defensive scheme will be different this year? If so, what percentage? Thanks.
Well, see, that's a tough question because the scheme changes. It's an ever-evolving thing. That's part of Matt Patricia's deal, is that he likes to game plan for specific opponents. And we've seen that in the past. Sure, they might not blitz a lot, and they might run a lot of man and a lot of press man. But by the end of the year, they were running a decent amount of zone. And I think they have the personnel to kind of mix and match with a 4-3 and a 3-4 front. And listen, at the end of the day, it's still a lot of nickel, and they mix and match there too with 3 corner nickel and 3 safety nickel. And I think when you look at their signings, they've really tried to set themselves up to be able to do that. Obviously running a 3 corner nickel with Justin Coleman, and then a 3 safety nickel with either Will Harris and Deron Harmon, or maybe Jaron Kearse is able to get his way in there as well. So I think that they've given themselves a lot of flexible options there when it comes to scheme. I don't think it's going to be markedly different just because they played a little bit of everything as it is. This is Matt Patricia's defense. That's never changed, and I don't think it will change as far as like what his philosophies are and what his principles are, which, you know, kind of get the rush up the middle and have that way your ends can clean up and really build through the middle of the defense. All of those things, I think, remain staples of a Matt Patricia defense. I think being able to scheme for opponents and try to find opponents' weaknesses on offense is still a Matt Patricia defense. I don't think that's going to really change one way or the other.
Here's another question from First Black Man on the Net. What type of impact will Corey Undlin bring to Patricia's defensive scheme, and will it differ from Pascalone's?
I mean, it's Matt Patricia's scheme still, you know. I think that it is. I mean, listen, I could be the defensive coordinator. It'd still be Matt Patricia's scheme, right? Like you could be, like no matter who it is, it's still going to be Matt Patricia's scheme. That's his thing, his defense. So I think what you'll see is a little bit of a difference when it comes to Corey Undlin, just because he has different experiences, he has different philosophies, he can kind of bounce different things off of Matt Patricia that Paul Pasqualoni couldn't. So I'll be curious to see how much influence he has. I think you could maybe see a little bit of difference in the secondary, because that is really Corey's experience. He's been a secondary coach for a long time. So that's where I think maybe you could see the most changes. But to my understanding, and listen, Matt Patricia hasn't come out and said any of this, of course, but this is a big year for him and for Bob Quinn. So I have a tough time seeing anyone other than Matt Patricia really run the defense. And because of that, I don't see that much changing because of Corey Undlin, other than maybe a few things, small things here or there that probably we won't know until training camp, because I don't think that they totally know it yet, because they're still in draft mode and free agency mode.
Okay. We got Devin99 in the chat. He seems to wants to know, do we draft a running back in round 2?
Round 2?
Before, I know that it's possible if we trade down, we have more than one second round pick. So let's take that into account too, if it's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible that they take a running back in the second round? Sure. I mean, that's been the sweet spot for the Lions in taking running backs since I've covered this team, honestly. Amir Abdullah was a second round pick. Kerryon Johnson was a second round pick before I even got here. Mikel LaShore was a second round pick. So, you know, varying degrees of success there. But yeah, I think it's possible. I think this is a good running back class. I think it's a somewhat deep running back class. You know, but I think if you're the Lions, you can get a player like Joshua Kelly probably in the 3rd or 4th round. And I think he's going to be a good NFL running back. He's from UCLA, and they coached him at the Senior Bowl. So I do think they will take a running back in the draft, or potentially sign a veteran, but they've gone that route the last couple of years with really no success, because Garrett Blount was okay for like 4 games, and CJ Anderson was cut I think after 4 games. So they haven't really had that success there when it comes to veteran running backs. So I think you could see them go the rookie route, and maybe they go that way early, because right now, if you're the Lions, and this is no knock on Kerryon Johnson, but it's just truth, is that you can't trust him at this point to play 16 games because he hasn't done it yet. I think he can at some point. I think he's had some unfortunate luck when it comes to injuries, and I think he's a really good player. But until you see him play 16 games, I don't think you can count on him to play 16 games. So to me, if I'm the Lions, yeah, I have to really consider a running back in the draft, because Bo Scarborough, listen, he had a really great second half of the season, but can he produce that over a full year? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. So you have a lot of question marks at running back. Again, I don't think it's as big a need as some of the other needs they have on the roster, because you can find running backs. And if your offensive line blocking is good and you have a good passing game, you can find running backs who will just be able to get yards on the basis of that. But yeah, I think they'll take one. Second round, I just don't know. I think it's just going to depend on how the board falls. If a running back is sitting there that talent-wise is way better than the other options on the board, then yeah, I could see them doing it. But I don't know if it's this is oh my God, they're absolutely going to take a running back in the second round no matter what happens. Because let's just say Jordan Love, as an example, let's say Jordan Love falls to them at 35. I think they take him at 35. They don't necessarily need a quarterback either, right? But at that point, you have to look at, well, if this guy's so much more talented than the other guys on your board, you take him. So there's so many variables there that I don't know. And just for the record, I think Love has gone way before that point.
I mean, I think he's definitely a bona fide first round pick. Before we move on to the next fan question, how do you think that the Lions did in free agency? What grade would you give?
Oh, I hate grades.
I
think just because it's so, because I mean, we don't know exactly what the role, right now, right? Let's be real.
Well, currently, it's not free agency.
But let's be real. They signed Jamie Collins. I think that or Danny Shelton, I think, and Danny Shelton, I think, are their two best signings. We don't know where Jamie Collins is going to play. Are they going to use him as an edge? Are they going to use him in coverage? Is he going to be more of the middle guy, and they kick Jarrad Davis out to the edge? We just don't know these things yet. So it's hard to grade that and judge that, because it's just a giant unknown. I think they got better at linebacker overall between Reggie Ragland and Jamie Collins over Devon Kennard. I do. I think they got better at linebacker. On the defensive line, I don't know. I mean, Danny Shelton, I think, has a lot more potential than Damon Harrison, but a healthy Damon Harrison, you know what you're getting, which is one of the best run stoppers in the NFL. Danny Shelton has that possibility, but we don't know how much better he's going to be. But, and then the secondary, as I talked about, you got rid of Darius Slay. I mean, Desmond Trufant's a fine player, but I don't know, man. Overall in free agency, I feel like they got a little better, but I don't know. I don't think they got leaps and bounds better. It's not like I'm sitting here and wow, this team has so many more weapons. I think that they are a bit more versatile. I think they have a bit more players that are familiar with what Matt Patricia wants to do, which frankly, this year in particular can be a lot more helpful than other years, which is why I think the Patriots thing, and I wrote about it, but I put this in the story, I'm not as oh my God, they just keep signing former Patriots as some other people. Because right now, this year, with so many unknowns right now in the world in general, you don't know if you're going to have off-season workouts. We don't know what training camp may or may not look like, right? We just don't know. Anyone who says they know doesn't know. You just don't know. So to sign a bunch of players, one person at least on every level of the scheme that you're counting on that already knows the scheme, and in 2 of the 3 cases knows Patricia, knows what he wants, you figure Patricia knows exactly how he wants to use them, I think can only be a benefit, because it'll help the learning curve right away. So when you do get into training camp, whenever that is, those guys aren't going to need a week to get caught up to speed. They're just going to know. And that's a huge benefit, I think, for the Lions this year. But overall in free agency, I think they maybe got a little bit better, but not appreciably so. But again, I don't necessarily think that that's a huge deal either, only because go and look at free agency winners over the last decade, including the Lions last year, and how did they do in the regular season? Free agency doesn't always, like big splash free agents that you sign all over the place, doesn't always equate to success in the fall. I think you saw that with Cleveland last year, and you saw that with the Lions last year. I mean, they made some big splash free agent signings, right? Trey Flowers, Justin Coleman, Jesse James barely did any. Like, he was a non-factor at tight end. These were big splash signings that led them to a 3-12-1 record. Sure, some of that had to do with Matthew Stafford, but I've always been the belief, look at the good teams in the NFL and what they really do in free agency and why they're good year over year. It's now that changes from year to year, of course. Like, some teams will be like Green Bay, I think, was a little bit more active this year, for instance. But like, that's when I look at it and I say teams that like are making big splash signings over and over and over again in free agency, usually that means you have some pretty large holes on your roster, and that doesn't necessarily equate to success in the fall.
Facts.
Okay. I'm gonna go to Noma's, and Noma's, you can ask the next question.
Yeah, I want to backpedal off something you said involving the linebacker core. I know we have like somewhat of a question mark going on there, and when you consider that they just added Reggie Ragland and Elijah from the San Francisco 49ers, what possible role or what way how they could impact this Lions defense, and how do you see them being possibly used?
Well, all right, Elijah Lee is more of a special teams guy, right? Like, if I'm Steve Longa, if I'm Jalen Reeves-Maybin, if I'm Jason Kabinda, those three guys specifically, I'm on notice that they brought somebody in who can really maybe push to be that main core special teams linebacker, and you're only going to have room for so many guys. So I see Elijah Lee as more of a, like, in case of emergency-ish type linebacker, but he's more of a special teams stalwart. Reggie Ragland's the interesting one to me because, does he push Christian Jones for Christian Jones's job? Does signing him maybe mean that they are going to kick Jared Davis over the edge a little bit more, which we don't know? I don't know. I mean, I think there's just, again, it goes back to not totally knowing how they're going to use Collins and Ragland yet and what their roles are going to be, because they could have signed Reggie Ragland being like, all right, you're going to compete for a starting gig, but worst case, you're kind of our like fifth linebacker, type of thing where you can play, you're that super sub type guy, but he doesn't play special teams. So that's a key too. And not having seen some of the contracts yet, that generally will tell you some stuff too about how much they really think their role will be. So I'd be curious to see what Reggie Ragland's contract ends up looking like to really make that determination. If he's given like $4 or $5 million, then that they expect him to have a pretty big role. If he signs for a vet min or a little bit above that with not much guaranteed on it, then that it's kind of like, let's see what happens in camp, man. Like, that type of thing. So I think there's just still a lot of question marks at linebacker. Like I said, I think they got a little bit better there just because Jamie Collins offers versatility. But I still think we don't know when it comes to at least what Reggie Ragland. Elijah Lee, to me, is a special teams guy. Maybe he surprises me and ends up pushing, but he feels like he feels very much like, if you remember a few years back when they had Brandon Copeland, that they could be like, all right, like Brandon Copeland was really good on special teams, and like you could throw him in and he'd be okay at linebacker. I feel like that is where Elijah Lee probably is. And Steve Longa was very similar to that not 2 years ago, but he was hurt 3 years ago. And I think Jalen Reeves-Maybin last year showed a little bit of that. And same thing with Miles Killebrew when they played him at linebacker instead of safety. Again, all these guys, by the way, still on the team. So you have a glut of special teams focused players. Special teams a big focus for Matt Patricia. Not all those guys are going to be around. Like that's just clear, because you can only carry so many special teams guys per year.
Right. And the other part of my question was also, there's a feeling that we drastically need to get an edge rusher, specifically a 4-3 type of edge rusher. And when I look at the depth chart, We know Trey Flowers was our 4-3 in from last year. We our splash, and then we still have Romeo Okwara as probably the depth guy behind him. Then you still had the question mark in Austin Bryant. I haven't really been able to decipher what the Lions still want to do with him. I'm quite sure still interested and what he could probably bring. I'm not sure if I have heard rumors that he could be a jack linebacker for him, or either possibly still rotate at end. I'm not like what's going on there at the edge. Do the Lions need to pursue one, or should they just keep that position the way it is?
I mean, yeah, I think they'll add. Like again, if Chase Young is sitting there, like, hi.
Yes.
Chase Young, like, come on, but I think there are other guys that can fill that role. Josh Uche from Michigan is a guy that they worked with at the Senior Bowl. I think is a really good player. He's a guy that could be sitting there in that second, like we were talking about second round running back earlier. If he's sitting there at 35 and you haven't taken Chase Young at 3, maybe you take Josh Uche and he works into that mix somehow. Bradley Anye is a guy that maybe in the 3rd or 4th round they take, and he was very productive at the Senior Bowl. Again, they worked with him there. So to me, I think that's where you look a little bit and say, yeah, I think they're going to add in the draft. I don't think they're necessarily going to add anyone in free agency at this point, but they kind of did already in Jamie Collins. And like you said, if that's where he plays is more edge, they have Trey Flowers. Austin Bryant, they were obviously high on. He has potential, but he was hurt, so we just don't know. And yeah, they have Romeo Okwara still. And listen, I think there are some decent edge rushers in the draft beyond just Chase Young. I mean, we've been talking about Romeo Okwara. We don't know how healthy Julian Okwara is, right? But Julian Okwara is a darn good football player that was probably in that top 10 to top 15 range before he got hurt last year. The Lions are going to know a lot about him because they have some pretty good inside information on him, from Romeo here. So maybe if he's sitting there in the 2nd round, maybe that's a way they go. And he's a guy that could theoretically, it would be really interesting if they did that because he could end up pushing his brother out of a job depending on how that goes. And that would be a really awkward situation. But you look at those things and you say, well, he would be a really good player. So I think that they have a lot of options, and it's going to be something worth watching. I don't think they're done at the edge, but they have some options there. But again, I don't think they're done, and I think there are still free agents out there that could fit. But to me, I think you could look at the draft at this point.
Hey, Mike, I know you said you had to be out about 7:30. Are you good for a little while longer? Or
yeah, we can do another 10 or so.
Okay, sounds good to me. All right, Mike, you had a question.
I have a question, and I know the fan base for the Lions is split 50-50. I've done so many polls, and it's extremely close about this question. The Lions were told they have to be a playoff contender this year for the coaches to return. Do you think that's a legitimate, and that's not something underscoring? It's legitimate. They must make the playoffs or be a playoff contender for this team and the coaching staff to stay in place. This is a big deal from our subscribers. We've been hearing about it, seems every week.
Yeah, so I was in that meeting with the Fords and with Rod Wood. And the way that it came to me was meaningful football in December. Essentially still being around. Now, because listen, we've seen it. And I think that they're in a really tough division this year. And I think the NFC West is incredibly tough this year. So there's a chance that they could be 9-7, 10-6, hanging around until 2 weeks left in the year and not make the playoffs. Well, if you're 10-6, they probably will be back for 2021. Say they make the playoffs at 7-9. Say this division ends up being bad, right? You make the playoffs at 7-9 and you get blown, so you win the division at 7-9, but you get your doors blown off. Well, is that enough progress? I don't know. So I think that they've left it malleable on purpose. And I don't think we know the answer yet because, again, there's also the fact that there's, at least as of now, a 7th wildcard team or a 7th team in each division. So that makes it even easier to be playing meaningful football in December. To me, I took it as if they're playing meaningful football in December, they've got a shot to be back in 2021. If they're sitting there at 4-10, yeah, probably not coming back. If they're sitting there at 8-6 and let's just say Stafford gets hurt and they end up at 8-8, well, you can point and say, hey, 8-6 in the playoff hunt, lose your quarterback again. kind of made a better decision than last year with Chase Daniel. Like, so I think there's just so much unknown and so much variable with it. I know that's a cop-out answer, but I think it's the truth. Is there's just so much that can play out in so many different ways that to read into that statement as playoffs or bust is not entirely accurate. To read into that as, as long as they're competitive in December, like, I don't think you can buy into that either. I think they left themselves a lot of outs and a lot of wiggle room to make whatever decision it is that they feel fit or they feel is the right decision to make after the 2020 season.
Thank you for that answer. I'm going to go to a fan question now. What type of impact will Hank Fraley bring to the running game, being that he'll be switching over to more of a power scheme like he did at UCLA, or you think he will be? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to see much change, honestly, because Hank Fraley, he's run a room before, like you said, at UCLA and at San Jose State before that. But he is a Jeff Davidson disciple. He's worked with Jeff Davidson in multiple spots in the NFL. They have a very similar philosophy. So I don't think you'll see much change unless Darrell Bevell wants the change. I don't think that you're just going to see change for change's sake because they went from Davidson to Fraley, right? Like, because if you were going to make a massive change for change or massive change, you probably are not hiring Hank Fraley to be your offensive line coach because you want something much different. Well, Hank Fraley, I don't think is going to give you that much different of a look than Jeff Davidson. I don't know that for sure because haven't really talked much to Hank. I talked to him briefly at the Senior Bowl, but we didn't get into a ton of stuff, right? So I don't think the short answer to that, or short-term answer to that is, I don't think you'll see that much change because Fraley learned a lot from Jeff Davidson. So they come from a similar tree as far as offensive line goes.
Okay, cool. Let's get to another question here. I'm trying to find one I just had. Okay, so what do you think the Lions? I know the guy says it's really early, but what is your projections for 2020 for the Detroit Lions? We haven't even had the draft yet, but that's the question.
For what? Their record?
Yeah, their record.
We don't know what the schedule is.
Somebody asked it. I was like, okay,
I'll tell you exactly what it is because it's what I say. I kicked myself last year. I think I did the podcast at the beginning of the season, and I was really high on them. And I think I said at that point that I never deviate, but I was deviating. I am just going to stick with what I always stick with at this point of the year, which is 8-8, which is the mean in the NFL and generally where most teams kind of end up in that 7-9 to 9-7 range. So I think you're looking at 8-8, and I'm not going to budge off that until I see their draft, until I see their schedule, until I see what the season looks like, because we don't know any of that right now. There might not be 16 games. Who knows?
Right,
we just don't know. So I'm gonna punt, and I'm gonna,
I would too, man.
I'm gonna punt and say 8-8, and I apologize, listener guy, if that doesn't make you happy, but I mean, we don't even know what the schedule is. Like, you can't know. I mean, if they say they got like. Just to kind of go into a little bit more on this, like, say they end up playing, a Monday night in Green Bay, and then they get Houston on a Sunday. Well, that's a tough turnaround. Or they get Minnesota on that following Sunday, like we saw last year. Minnesota beats the heck out of them every time because that defense is so aggressive. Well, that's generally a game off of a short week that I think the Lions lose almost more often than not, and we've seen that. So much of that, I think, is debated on the schedule and how that falls. Like, who do they get on Thanksgiving and what's that game right before that? Do they have a full week after Thanksgiving or 10 days? Like, there's so much machinations in that actually do matter when it comes to predicting wins and losses, even though it might not seem that way.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Anybody on the panel have another question for Mike before we got to let him go here pretty soon?
I have one question. I think Darrell Bevell had a really good year last year. So my question is, what is your opinion of Darrell Bevell, and do you think he's the best offensive coordinator Matthew Stafford has had?
Ooh, that's actually a good question. I I like Bevel. I think he put together a really good offense. I think you've seen throughout his career he's put together really good offenses. Obviously, it didn't end particularly well in Seattle, but I don't think if you are somebody who likes the Lions, I don't think you can complain much about what you saw last year offensively when Matthew Stafford was healthy. And frankly, even when after Matthew Stafford was hurt, I mean, Darrell Bevel was working with not much there, especially especially once Marvin Jones got hurt. I mean, he's working with Kenny Golladay, Danny Amendola, and like a bunch of guys, right? Like there's not that much to work with, and the offense at that point wasn't a huge I mean, it was not good, right? But like David Blau was never expected to play in a game when they, traded for him. Like that was a developmental trade from the jump. See how he does. See if they can build him up to maybe be the backup of the future. Like there was never the expectation he was going to play when they traded for him. Like that, like you had Josh Johnson on the team at that point. Jeff Driscoll didn't show up till week 4. Like you just, Darrell Bevel got I don't think he got a raw deal because I think everyone understands it, but like the dude made like, I'm going to butcher the saying, but like he made chicken salad out of like, like raw chicken. But like,
I agree with you.
I mean, that's just kind of what he did. And so I think he's fine. Best coordinator Stafford's had, I don't know. I mean, he's definitely not the worst. Like that's for sure. I still think Scott Linehan's a really good offensive coordinator. I think that he really produced when he was with the Lions. I would probably still put Scott Linehan above Darrell Bevel, but Bevel right now to me is number 2. But it's tough to say that too because
didn't Bevel did win a Super Bowl. I don't know if Lennon has coordinated.
Yeah, but that's I mean, there's so much to that, right? Like
right.
There's so much behind that of like, sure, Darrell Bevel won a Super Bowl, but he had the Legion of Boom. like that was a defensive team. So yeah, I mean the offense was good. They had Russell Wilson. He developed Russell Wilson really well. And don't get me wrong, I think Darrell Bevel's a really good coordinator. Right now, I would probably take Scott Linehan by a shade over Darrell Bevel, but if they have another good year on offense, then probably Bevel gets that nod. I want to see it for more than 1 year. But Scott Linehan is a very good offensive coordinator, and I think that he showed that when he was in Detroit as well. Remember, when he took over, they were coming off 0-16, and Matthew Stafford threw for a 5,000-yard year. Really, they had a pretty decent season in 2011 overall without much, he never really had a running game until 2013 when they had Reggie and Joik. And you look at some of those numbers that Reggie and Joik put up together in 2013. And sure, they had Calvin, which helped, but like other than like Burleson for the first couple of years, because by the end, I mean, Nate was hurt in 13. And then, that was kind of it for him after that. Obviously they had Titus and we all saw what happened there, unfortunately. So I don't know. I mean, Ryan Broyles was supposed to be really good. I think Darrell Bevel was really good. I think Scott Linehan right now, I would take Scott Linehan over Darrell Bevel as far as for what Matthew Stafford has done in his career. Just looking at that, not looking at who's necessarily a better coordinator overall, but just for what they've done with Matthew Stafford, I think Scott Linehan right now gets it by a shade. But if Matthew Stafford has another good year like he did for the first 8 games of this past year, I think Bevel probably overtakes Linehan as the best coordinator for Matthew Stafford that Stafford has had in his career.
Okay. Are you still good or you got to go?
I can take one more question.
One more question. Anybody got a question on the panel?
Yeah, just one more. If it's possible that the Lions still may bring another guy in for the roster, free agency what the cap space they do have left, is it possible anybody that's possibly in the rumor they could be targeting for either side of the ball? You think they could be looking to bring to the roster?
I mean, I still think they're going to bring more guys in. It's just a matter of when. There's still good players out there. I don't think they're going to pay massive amounts of money for somebody at this point. Like, so that probably takes some guys out of consideration, like, Jadeveon Clowney, for instance. But I think you find a guy that's, you pay him $4 million, $5 million, and and you got a shot to get a pretty decent player. Usually you start to still see guys sign, I mean, there's good players out there. Logan Ryan's a decent player that he's still out there. Obviously has some ties to Matt Patricia as well. So I think that they can still bring somebody good in. I mean, I don't think Dion Lewis signed anywhere. I don't know every signing everywhere, so it's possible that Dion Lewis did sign somewhere.
Yeah, he went to the Giants.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just honestly, I did a chat last week, and some people were asking me questions, and I'm like about like other teams, and I'm like, honestly, like it takes a couple weeks to catch up under normal circumstances, let alone the circumstances that we're all under right now.
Right.
So, do I think they bring a few more players in? Yeah, of course. Do I think they'll be impact players? Tough to really say at this point. Remember, guys have signed late every year that have made teams. Not only just the Lions. In the Lions' perspective, Lance Moore was a late signing a few years back. Ended up being pretty productive for Detroit. Mike Daniels was a training camp. Was cut by the Packers and then signed in training camp. Anquan Bolden signed just before training camp. So I still think that there are players that they could bring in this year. Again, there's just so many unknowns with what's going on in the world that it's tough to make, I think, any sort of predictions on certain things. But yeah, I think they'll still bring in another player or two. What type of player and who that is, I would be hesitant to try and even venture a guess at this point, just because I think there's a lot that we don't know.
All right. We really appreciate you being here today, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully everybody on the show, everybody goes and checks out my podcast. It's called The Michael Rothstein Show. You can find it wherever you listen to your podcasts. We've got, I don't know when this podcast is dropping, but the podcast that's coming out tomorrow, which would be Monday since we're recording this Sunday night, of Donovan Peoples-Jones, the former Michigan receiver, on. We've had a bunch of other guests on the past. Mike Reese was on last week, the Patriots reporter from ESPN, and we talked a lot about Jamie Collins and Deron Harmon on there if people want to check it out. And obviously, also check out all my work on ESPN.com as well.
Thank you, Mike. This was live tonight, by the way.
Oh, even better. I did not know that. Surprise to me. I'm glad that I didn't completely go insane then. That's fantastic.
Yeah, me too. No, I'm just kidding. I know you're pretty good.
All right. So tomorrow, listen for the Donovan Peoples-Jones episode, and please give a 5-star rating, review, subscribe, download, all that fun stuff if you can. And we've got more fun episodes lined up that hopefully y'all will enjoy. And it's been a pleasure being on with you guys. Thank you for having me as always.
Yes, thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Okay, guys, we got a little more time here. I'm not prepared to end. Are you guys ready to go or ready to keep going? Or
no, we signed some players today.
Yes, we did. Let's go into that. J-Mo, you want to drop some knowledge on the people there?
First of all, me and Mike had to stay strong because he mentioned Christian Jones and Dion Lewis.
I know.
He was like, does this mean they're pushing Christian Jones out? I'm like, if they're not pushing Christian Jones out, we got an issue.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because I'm like, really?
But it was great to have him on, man. That was a great experience to get a different perspective from a ESPN reporter. Make sure you guys go listen to his content. I listen. I'm sure Mike listens as well. So that was very great. So
yeah, it was a good time. It was a little different from what we normally do, and I realized that. And he had a prior commitment at 7:45. I didn't know that until just a little while ago. So I'm appreciating you guys giving questions and stuff. And we have him on again. We'll have more time for questions. I'm pretty sure. I'll talk to him about that. Maybe we can get him on again in a couple weeks or something.
And we got some good stuff for you folks. We have a new guest Tuesday night that's going to be on the roundtable. It's going to be extremely awesome. I can't wait to you guys hear and see who that is. And we have another individual, hopefully on Thursday, who's got a lot of influence on YouTube, and we're excited to give you guys the content you deserve.
Absolutely. This was a fun show, guys. I don't know. I can't believe we had so many good questions from the panel. I appreciate each and every one of you being here as well. Nomas, Tim, JMO and Mike. Really appreciate you guys coming on and supporting us and supporting the DSA.
Oh man, no problem, man. All those questions are off the top of the head too. So
Yeah,
And they
I know
were
what you mean.
good. They were
They
very
were
good.
good,
Yeah.
JMO. That one question was fantastic, man.
but
I
yeah,
was
so
hoping that was
the Lions signed Geronimo Allison.
Yes, they did.
And
Your
I just
favorite
wanna know
favorite
what the-
position.
After I say what I say, I want to know what the panel thinks about this. And see, that's why I asked Rothstein this question about this speed of receiver, because I think it's ridiculous. Stephon Diggs literally went on Twitter, was like, speed doesn't matter that much. I'm like, I don't understand why fans are clamoring for speed of receiver when we have, you could say, an elite receiving core. It just doesn't make sense, but fans
He's-
are never satisfied.
I-
But
no.
go ahead, Jim.
I don't think we really got much in this guy right now. I mean, if he becomes healthy, he's a burner, and he could actually stretch the field a little bit for us. But in my opinion, right now, I think he's fighting to make the roster, to be honest.
Yeah, and
I worry about him because I watched him. I know Aaron Rodgers throws one of the softest footballs, and he couldn't catch Aaron Rodgers. I'm just being honest, man. He couldn't catch Aaron Rodgers' passes. You think he's gonna be able to catch Stafford's passes?
No.
No.
Not without
like I said,
his career is under 1,000 yards, and he's played for 4 years, and he doesn't have over 10 touchdowns either combined. I think maybe 11. I just don't see this guy's not gonna make the team. That's just
Nomus, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
yeah, I kind of compare, like, I feel what Jim just said, but I kind of compare it to the whole Jermaine Kearse thing from last year, but Jermaine Kearse is a better receiver. That's just where he's there to really, to me, push whoever we bring in, whether it's a late round pick in the draft or, we still got Travis Fulham. I think he's that type of guy who's going to come in and push those guys and that be a measuring tool for them. I think that's the best. He's here for it, and I think they gave him about $1 million just in case he is good enough to bring on the roster. So it's kind of like a prove it deal.
It is. It's kind of a cuttable contract. It was 900,000 or something with incentives after that. So
I see, Devin 99 said, "I hope we keep Travis Fulgham." Well, yeah,
we have him now.
I'm not out on that. I'm not out on that. I just think it's going to be a lot of competition, and we just going to see who comes out on top. But I just hope it's not Chris Lacey, because he's loved by the Lions for some odd reason I'll never understand. And Chris Lacey knows that I feel that way about him. Literally, he knows.
And the sad thing is, there was a couple moments where he could have broke away big if he didn't get tripped up. I'm like, oh man. And I just look at a couple of those plays Lacey made last year. I'm like, that would have been big for the blow if he could have actually got open and caught those passes, but he got tripped up.
But the main reason why I asked him Rothstein about the TJ Hawkinson thing is because I'm tired of getting any receivers or any receiving threats that's going to take away targets from TJ Hawkinson. I feel like he should be the second option without a doubt. And if you look at every other team with elite caliber tight ends, Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, guys like that, George Kittle, they're either the number 1 or number 2 option. And unless TJ is trash, which we know he's not, he needs to be the number 1 option. It was one more question. Did y'all see what Marvin Jones said about 1.5 15 touchdowns this year?
Yeah, I did see that earlier today.
What do y'all think about that?
What's that noise?
That's me. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hey, before you get into this, I got to get off real quick. My kid's crying, freaking.
Okay, bud.
Yeah. All right, man.
Thanks for joining us.
Right.
Hey,
thanks, Mike.
This is what we do. Hey, thanks, Maniac Tim, man. We got to go live more with you. Adios, fellas.
Adios. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I wanted to get you guys' take on the answer about the mandate. What did you think about that?
Well, I like that to know that he was in the room.
Yeah,
So,
wasn't that something? Yeah.
I didn't know that at all. So
Yeah.
the fact that he was in the room and that's what he got from it leads me to believe that's exactly how it is. Basically, we fringe 8-7, 9-7, 8-8. They're probably going to keep them. So basically, I think unless we go 6-10 or 7-9, they'll stay.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, yeah. So we basically 8-8 and they'll stay.
Tim, did you have something on that? You were trying to say
Oh,
something.
wait, well, I was just going to say that
Tim?
basically, yeah, can you hear me? Hello? Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Yeah, you're live. Go.
That I think that the Lions would need to have a terrible season in order for them to get rid of him. Because, like you said, he did leave it way open. That it's just too broad based. If they want to get rid of him, he would need to do something real. We would need to do real bad this season.
My only thing, I'm sorry, but my only thing is I see them still coming back because if, and let's just on paper say again, I'm gonna quote it again. On paper, if we're running the football a little bit better and the receivers are still able to make plays, at some point, and the defense is even 50% improved from last year, at some point we're gonna win more than 5 games or so. At some point, even if we don't make the playoffs, I still feel like we'll win more games than last year.
Yeah, I
That's
agree
just-
with that,
If Stafford's
especially if we're
healthy.
healthy. Yeah.
Like if
that's what I'm
Stafford's
saying.
healthy, we probably win 9 games last year, and I'm sticking to that.
I agree.
Like, so if he's healthy this year, we'll at least win 8 games. That's my opinion. So they probably
Yeah.
will be staying.
My
So-
thing though with I'm sorry,
ahead.
but I was gonna say my thing with Marvin Jones though. You have to remember, I think he's on the last year of his deal, if I'm correct, and I think
Right.
Galladay is at the point where he needs to be extended, and I think that's why a lot of fans are saying like we do still need more help receive because if let's say you do lose Marvin, now you have to figure out to replace him, so you may have to draft somebody in between that like that second, third round pick that we have,
Yeah, I think
or
they will.
between that
Yeah.
fifth,
Yeah.
to kind of get a guy we can really bring in, like
My thing is though, when you have what we think TJ Hockenson is gonna be, receiver is just a whole different thing. I mean, outside of Kansas City, how many teams have an elite tight end and an elite receiver? Like no other team has it because they got that tight end. So
Right.
once TJ Hawkinson's rising, our need for a receiver goes down a bit, and then you have Kenny Galladay. And then you're gonna you can draft somebody. And I'm just talking about for this season, we don't need to be adding receivers. Next season, sure. But this season, 6th round, 5th round
Mhm.
at best.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
I wouldn't go much
Right.
higher than that. All right, guys, I'm going to go final thoughts. I got to jump off here in a little bit, so I want to make sure everybody got their final thoughts. And I'm going to start with you, Nomas.
Oh man, thank you, Jim. I know we haven't had too much time to get acquainted.
That's
Acquainted
okay.
on what you're saying. But thank you for having me on the show. I can't believe I just got to talk to the ESPN reporter and Michael Rothstein. So thank him again for coming on the show. Hope you all in the chat had a fun time with us over here trying to be professional. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity and thank you and blessings to everybody on the panel with me. Have a good night.
Thank you. All right, J-Mo.
It was a fun show, definitely something different, and this was basically just for all the subscribers, so you can hear a different perspective. I'm sure y'all happy to know that he was in the room where they were actually talking about this win now mandate. So we got to see a little bit in that window that we're all wondering about. Well, I'll call it the burning house that we're all trying to save them from. But
Okay, I like that, J-Mo.
like we're looking in the window with a fire extinguisher, like, can y'all let us in, please? And then Mike came out of there like, yeah, y'all don't want to go in there because that went down mandated. It's just not like how y'all think it is, let's walk away. But it was great. It was a great show. Make sure you guys like the video if you haven't already. Make sure you subscribe to No Miss J and Lions on the Prowl and my channel if you haven't already. And I'm glad we got some good questions across. And we'll see what happens. I really can care less about Geronimo Allenson, but it is what it is.
That's good, man. All right, Tim, final thoughts.
Yeah. Well, this year I would definitely like to see TJ Hockenson used a lot more. I mean, like either a first or second option too, because they did bring him to be a difference maker. And if you draft him that high, you got to really get your money's worth out. So I agree.
All right,
And
guys.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
All right, guys. I had a great time tonight. It was awesome to have Mike on. Hopefully, we'll have him on again. We do have other guests I have probably in storage here for a while. I'll just try to pull some of them out, and we'll have them on shows generally same time. So I just want to let you guys know. Anyway, though we're going through all this stuff in the real world, and I just wanted to take some time and get to somebody who's an expert and has been a beat writer for the Lions for a very long time to give us his opinions and things as we go through all this stuff and take our mind off of everything else for a while. So with that being said, everybody have a wonderful night, and we're out.
Watch